Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Garrison. I want to welcome you to this session of Humanity Rising. As we begin today, I want to comment on the unfolding events in Gaza because I think there is a feeling, I think all of us intuit, that the trains are all coming into the station at the same time. I want to begin by just noting that yesterday was Holocaust Day, and it was on that day that Hamas released Al Jazeera its decision to accept the ceasefire proposal that had been agreed to previously by the Israelis and the Americans, and everyone was waiting for Hamas's answer. And it came. And when it came, everyone was shocked. And the Israeli war cabinet assembled and decided that it was still unacceptable, but nevertheless is sending a delegation to Cairo, although no one is quite sure what they're authorized to negotiate or not. But it was clear that both the Israelis and the United States were caught flat-footed. This was not a proposal that anyone expected Hamas to accept. As someone who's been around for just a while, I just want to remember back in 1986, after Mr. Gorbachev had come into power, something very similar happened. The Reagan administration, which was in the process of the largest military buildup in U.S. history up to that time, planning to spend over $1 trillion upgrading our military. And we're putting cruise missiles and Pershing II missiles into Europe, intermediate range missiles into Europe for the first time, that radically destabilize the geostrategic balance, because nuclear weapons in Europe means that they can hit Russia within a matter of 20 or 30 seconds, and vice versa. And there was a lot of pressure to negotiate, so the Americans came up with a proposal. They were sure Gorbachev would refuse. The proposal called for the Russians giving up 4 missiles for every 1 missile that the US gave up. And to everyone's shock and dismay in the White House and in the Pentagon, Gorbachev accepted. Because he said 4-1, 3-1, we all have more missiles than we can possibly deliver without completely destroying the world. And that unexpected acceptance of the US proposal, which was what led to that extraordinary relationship between Gorbachev and Reagan, and ultimately came to fruition in the ending of the Cold War. But it took somebody doing the unexpected. And that's what Hamas did yesterday. They did something unexpected, and they seized the initiative. And it's worth pointing out that that's what they did on October 7th. They seized the initiative. And they've created the Palestinian cause as a global phenomenon. And the recognition of the state of Palestine as a global imperative. I think it's worth noting that the Jews were given the state of Israel after they endured their Holocaust. But it never happened otherwise. And now, as Israel is committing genocide and creating a Holocaust in Gaza and the West Bank, it's clear that the time has come to award the Palestinians their own sovereignty as the world awarded it to the Jews after their Holocaust. And the fact that the people that endured the first one are transacting the second one is going to plague, I think, the human conscience for centuries to come. But often out of these kinds of situations, a redemption emerges that defies rational logic, but follows a deep patterning of history itself, in which the arc of history ultimately, as Martin Luther King said, bends toward justice. I think final comment that I would make pertains to why this week, this moment, triggered by Hamas, is so fraught with both contradictions, opportunities, and ambiguities. The situation for President Biden is that if he doesn't get a ceasefire, he doesn't bring some stability there, he's going to lose the election. I think everybody knows that. His polling numbers are at the lowest of his presidency. The Democratic progressives are deserting him. Trump is ahead in many of the polls. So if Biden doesn't do something in the Middle East of a dramatic nature, he's looking at the prospect of an electoral defeat. On the other side, Benjamin Netanyahu, if there is a ceasefire, he knows he's going to lose his job and possibly go to prison. So the same event cuts in polarized opposite direction, impacting the two chief protagonists in the entire drama. The one committing the genocide with his government, and the one who understands that the continuation of the genocide is going to cost him the presidency. And again, this has been brought into sharp relief by that which was unexpected. And that was the student protests. Everything was just kind of going along. And then all of a sudden, what erupted out of the youth of America that is now spread all over the world are campus occupations, nonviolent protests that compelled the media and the world to address what, in fact, is taking place. So it's been the young people, everyone. The young people in America, most of Hamas are people in their 20s. Let us not forget that. This drama is being motivated and shaped to a large extent by young people for whom the fires of revolution burn brightly. We'll see what happens over the next couple of days as these antinomial realities of mutual contradictions begin to play themselves out. But I would just conclude by asking everyone to hold Joe Biden in our hearts. He's the one man that can stop this. It's clear that the Israelis will not do it on their own. So the balances of history are now being weighed. And it is the White House, in this case, that will make the determining decision. And let us pray that peace prevails. So thank you, everyone, for bearing witness to what's happening in Gaza. It's so important, particularly as we commemorate the Holocaust. And we vowed then, never again. It's happening again, and we must consider deeply what that means. We want to turn our attention now to something that all of us know a little about, but not much. And that is the thing, the life that's hidden within us. We're going to talk today about the microbiome. Think of the microbiome in our gut. It's on our skin. It's in the soil. Microbiome is everywhere. We've had various sessions on Humanity Rising before, so we've discussed it. But we're now going to hear from our good friend and colleague, Tom Eddington, who is getting more and more deeply involved in his professional work with people that are exploring the microbiome. So Tom is going to join us for an initial presentation of some of the history about a microbiome at the hands of the corporations, and then we'll dialogue for the balance of the time. So welcome, Tom, and thank you for joining us. Tom's coming in from California today. So why don't you give us a presentation, Tom, of what you would like to present about the microbiome, and then we'll dialogue for the balance of the time.
Yeah, thank you, Jim, and thank you for your opening comments as always. There's so many parallels between what you were sharing this morning and what we're going to be talking about today. So I'd like to take us on a little bit of a historical journey, starting back in the run-up to and certainly during World War I, where for the first time in a significant way, humanity engaged in chemical warfare. And for any of us who've studied the history of World War I, it was just an absolutely gruesome war. The chemicals that were used, yellow mustard gas and others, that just destroyed any of the individuals fighting in that war. After the war, the chemical industry started to do more experimentation with government support, and as we went into, unfortunately, the sheer impact that World War I had, there were some treaties, there were some agreements made on limiting the use of chemicals in some ways in warfare. And so we went into World War II, and 80 million plus human beings lost their lives. We saw the economic, social fabric, and other aspects of human life on the planet completely and totally disrupted. And as governments looked to, whether it was through the Marshall Plan from the US, support for the countries that lost, quote unquote, the war in Europe, getting financial support and other means, countries began to focus on how to get their economies working again, how to restore their societies. And here in the US, one of the ways that the US government supported activity was through the support of the chemical industry. And we saw an extraordinary amount of research and production of chemicals going into the agricultural industry in particular that helped move the yield of crops, that helped deal with some of the food insecurity that was happening around the world, particularly right after the war. And within no time, we saw that the agricultural industry was at the whim of the chemical industry. And fast forward over the next several decades, we saw the increasing use of chemicals, fertilizers, pesticides, et cetera, not only being used in the agricultural industry, but essentially used as a tool, as a war on Mother Nature. Certainly during the Vietnam incursion, the chemicals that were used there, DDT, et cetera, destroying the natural environment in Vietnam to aid in the slaughter of Vietnamese citizens. And so over the last several decades, we've just seen over and over and over again this war on Mother Nature. And why I bring up all of that history is that we were destroying the microbiome that exists in the soil, the essential sources of life. And so when we look at starting in the 1990s and late 80s, the number of diseases that started showing up, the impact it started to have on human health, because we had destroyed the diversity of the microbiome in the soil. And so human beings started having a variety of diseases that started to show up. We had a burgeoning supplement industry because people weren't getting what they needed out of the food that naturally would have been there, zinc, magnesium, et cetera. And so we have found ourselves in 2024 with a global epidemic of all kinds of medical conditions, whether it's leaky gut, autism, et cetera, that are at least correlated, if not caused by the depletion of our soil and the microbiome in the soil. And so with that history, we're going to have a discussion today about where we have found ourselves, where we've gotten to, and what are some of the hopeful signs, whether it's the research and science that's been going on to really understand the microbiome in the gut, the microbiome on the skin, and the microbiome in the soil, and the promise of the research that's being done and where we might go with this. So Jim, I'd love to have you back and look forward to a robust conversation today.
Thank you, Tom. Tell us a little bit about your interest in this field of microbiome. It's a very specific area. It's pervasive around the world, but it's sort of a minority interest domain. Tell us why you've become so interested in this.
Yeah, for me, it started when I had my health crisis about 20 years ago, and I was attached to an IV pole for a couple of years, getting IV antibiotics 3 times a day, and taking thousands of milligrams of different kinds of antibiotics.
Whoa.
To try and combat a very serious infection I was dealing with. And as I was dealing with that, I had to do some pretty deep research into what was the impact of the antibiotics that I was putting in my system. And I started learning about probiotics and started to learn about how the human body works, and started to realize and understand, I mean, this is 20 years ago, but there was enough research at the time to really understand all the things that we didn't know about the human gut and the microbiome in our gut, and the important role that bacteria and viruses and the interaction they have with the human cells. And when we look at the human body, of the whatever it is, 75 trillion cells in the human body, most of them are not human. And so that's where my journey started, was really trying to understand, I'm putting all of this poison into my body to fight a disease.
Mm-hmm.
And how do I restore my health? How do I restore my body? And so that's where my personal journey started. And then once I got back on my feet and I started working again, one of my clients was one of the top research institutes in the world. And I was coaching one of their top scientists who has an extraordinary background in bioinformatics and using
Wow.
science and technology and mathematics to understand the interactions in the human gut. And so I went from my personal journey to working with one of the leading scientists in the world, understanding her research, the work that she was doing and that their institute was doing. And then from there, as I was able to get back into some of the passion projects that I had around reforestation and restoring the forest on the planet, I started learning more and more about soil microbiome and seeing the direct correlation and connection between the health of our soil and the health of human beings. So that's a bit about my journey and how I got here. And the fun part for me has been whether it's Kiss the Ground documentary film that came out a couple of years ago, the Common Ground film that came out last year. There's this increasing awareness, fantastic fungi, Paul Stamets film and Louis Schwartzberg's film on mushrooms. It's been a fun journey, and watching how certainly the scientific community and increasingly the commercial industry and governments are following this path that I've been on personally, and it's been a fun journey, and it continues to leave me with a sense of hope when I look at, for example, climate change. For 140 years, through our manufacturing systems, we've thrown in excess of 300 gigatons of CO2 into the atmosphere. And we've lost half the topsoil on the planet. We've lost 1 trillion trees on the planet. We've actually lost 3 trillion over time, but and we've destroyed our oceans. And so while a lot of industry is moving towards getting to net zero, and governments through the Paris Accords are moving to getting to net zero in terms of stop adding to the CO2 in the atmosphere, people aren't talking about in a serious way how to remove that legacy carbon, those 300 gigatons. And what we're discovering is that if we can restore the soil health, if we can restore the forest, if we can restore the oceans, we have the ability to draw down that excess CO2 and restore the climate and restore the natural systems on the planet. And as a result, restoring human health.
Right. Absolutely. Well, let me just ask a little bit about your own personal journey, because if you were on sort of an antibiotic IV drip for a seriously long time, you must have completely wiped out your microbiome, right?
Yeah,
How did you rehabilitate it?
Yeah, at the time, there wasn't a whole lot of information on how to restore the microbiome. I mean, there were just starting to be experimentation with fecal implants and other sorts of experimental means. For me, I did it through a combination of massive quantities of probiotic and prebiotic and diet.
So prebiotic, probiotic, and diet. That's what it took you to kind of reconstitute your own microbiome.
Yeah, one of the things I did that I found that was extraordinarily helpful was I did a 5-week fast. And during that 5 weeks, the first 3 weeks was focused on the physical body. And the practitioner I was working with at the time said most of her clients couldn't get beyond 1 or 2 weeks of fasting. It's not for the faint of heart. And when I got to week 4, it was I didn't know what to expect. And she had very few of her clients that had ever gotten to 4 weeks of fasting. And on the second day of the fast, it was I'll probably never forget this. It was a Tuesday morning at 9:30, and I started having this sensation in my body of memories from my childhood, starting in my right big toe. And just like watching bubbles in a body of water rising to the surface, I had a series of memories from my lifetime rising up through my body and leaving through the top of my head. And after 45 minutes, I literally was ready to get on the phone and call 911. I thought I was going crazy. I had never.
This was only day 2 of the fast.
No, this was in the fourth week.
Fourth week.
Yeah.
The second day of the fourth week. Gotcha.
Yeah. And I had a contemplative practice. I had long been a meditator, and I had done lots of things to take care of myself. But the experience I was having was something unlike I had ever experienced in my life. And I literally thought I was going crazy. And like watching a tide recede, after an hour and a half or so, that experience started to recede, and then my body could, come back to some semblance of normalcy. And so the fasting was one of the things that I attribute to actually helping restore my gut health. I experimented with lots of different diets, and since that period, I've been a vegetarian, and my body seems to have responded well to living on a animal protein-free diet.
Would you recommend that in terms of the microbiome? Do you think, is it your information that a vegetarian diet is more conducive to the kind of balanced microbiome than if you're eating meat, particularly red meat? Do you have any data on that?
Yeah, I mean, in the research I've done, there's been a lot of research done in a book written called Eat for Your Type, meaning what's your blood type, and that dictates the kind of diet you should be on. And I've talked to a number of practitioners who have been said there are people that need certain kinds of diets from their experience. I can't say, I'm not a nutritionist, I'm not a scientist, so I don't know what's best. For me, it's a combination of just from a spiritual perspective, taking another sentient being's life, and not to suggest that plants aren't sentient beings, but there's a higher level of consciousness with eating animal protein. And so I choose not to for that reason. I choose not to for environmental reasons, and I choose not to because my body seems to respond well to a vegetarian diet.
Mm. Mm. Yeah, there are many complex factors that come into a decision like that.
Yes.
Blood type and culture and individual proclivities and tastes. It's very individual, that decision. Let's just broaden our discussion to the microbiome, because I know that Zach Bush, who you actually brought on to Humanity Rising some time ago, had a lot to say about the importance of the microbiome. Why don't you review that? Because I think what Zach brought in was really almost a startling series of observations and facts about the microbiome that really places it as a foundational aspect of life itself, including human life.
Yeah. Thanks for invoking Zach's name. For me, I've been watching his journey professionally and personally, and I love that he started out, as a physician focused on human health, and had the experiences he had, being board certified in 3 different areas of medicine, and realizing that the answer was in soil and soil health. And so while he still is doing his research and his work on human health, he's made the same, or gotten to the same place I've arrived at in terms of the critical nature of restoring soil health. And he's got a number of initiatives happening around the world, a number of products that he and his team have developed to restore the not only the gut biome, but also the soil biome. And there's a direct correlation. between soil health and human health. And I'm inspired by his work and appreciate that, we still don't fully understand the complexity of the human gut. We don't fully understand
Yeah.
the complexity of the soil, but we know enough to know that it's critical that we restore the soil health and we find ways to deal with the parts of our lives that are accosting our human gut and the human
Yeah.
biome.
Yeah. Because you were saying, what's the percentage of microbiome in the gut and in the body?
I don't know what the percentage is, but the vast majority of cells in the human body are not human.
Yeah. 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 That's kind of a weird thing to take in.
Yeah, it causes the question: what does it mean to be human?
Yeah.
It invokes the question of who are we?
Yeah. Well, we're
Not
clearly a
just from a
community.
philosophical perspective.
Now, you were I'm referencing Zach Bush in terms of the various things that he's doing to both learn about and to improve the microbiome, in his case, mostly in the soils, etc. And I know that you're involved in a number of initiatives. Why don't you just lay out some of the things that you know about and in which you're personally participating that are really focused on improving the microbiome?
Yeah, so if we look at the soil health, as I mentioned, we've destroyed half the soil on Mother Nature or on planet Earth through a number of activities, whether it's construction or degradation of forest or contributions to climate change or chemicals and the farming practices that we've used, deep plowing, etc. And so in destroying the soil health, healthy soil can take as much as 1,000 years to create. And in the span of just a few decades, we have destroyed half the soil on Earth. And there's a fundamental difference between soil and dirt. What most human beings don't make a distinction between dirt and soil. Dirt is the remnants of dead soil. There's limited to no life in dirt. And yet in soil, healthy soil, it's extraordinary. You take healthy soil and look under a microscope, and it's teeming with life. It's teeming with activity beyond what we even know. In a healthy soil, there could be hundreds and hundreds of strands of DNA of different kinds of microbiome actively at work, working in collaboration with the fungi, working in collaboration with the minerals and chemicals that exist in a healthy soil. And we're probably decades away from fully understanding the life that's going on in soil health or a healthy soil. And yet we can see the direct results of healthy soil where, for example, we're seeing increasing activity in the hydroponics arena for agriculture. And yet, if you look at under a microscope or analyze the nutrient density of something grown hydroponically versus something that's grown in a healthy soil compared to something grown in unhealthy soil, and let's use sprouts, for example. Sprouts grown in hydroponic settings have a shelf life of a couple of days, and they start to wilt, they start to go bad. Sprouts grown in a suboptimal soil will outlive the hydroponically grown, and then sprouts grown in a healthy soil will have an extraordinary shelf life, and the nutrient density of the sprouts grown in a healthy soil is extraordinary. A lot of the plants that we consume, lettuce, beans, etc., when analyzed, they don't even register on minerals, things that the human body needs. And yet vegetables grown in a healthy microbiome will show up in laboratory testing. And it will fundamentally make a difference in a human being who's consuming that food.
Now, is it, that about the salmon, that farm salmon are completely different than wild salmon. So what you're saying is that hydroponic vegetables are fundamentally inferior to vegetables even raised in substandard soil.
Yep. Yep.
That's extraordinary because, you think of almost the entire nation of the Netherlands, which is one of the biggest food suppliers now in Europe. It's almost all hydroponic.
Yeah. One of
They have these huge buildings, these big,
Yep.
massive factories.
Yep. Yeah,
Wow.
and the water that they're growing the plants in, they're pumping them full of all kinds of nutrients, all kinds of things to help support the life of the plants, and yet they're fundamentally deficient compared to plants grown in healthy soil.
I didn't know that. I thought the hydroponic theoretically would have been kind of cleaner than all the pollution out there in the soils with the pesticides and so forth and so on. But when you take life out of the soil, you pay a price.
Exactly.
Just like when you take the salmon out of the ocean and put them in these ponds, it actually changes their DNA and their nutritional capacities. That's remarkable.
Yep.
That's remarkable.
Yeah, it just I'm not wanting to be critical, but
No. This is just laying out the facts of the matter.
Yeah, it goes back to our inability to fully understand the complexity of Mother Nature.
Yeah.
And we can, take with the best of intentions, an overly simplistic view of what's possible, and create something through ego and arrogance and best of intentions that fundamentally is inferior to what's possible in Mother Nature, that's had thousands of years of evolutionary history to get to where it is today.
Yeah, for sure. I want to hear more about some of the experiments and enterprises that you know about. But before, I'd like to, at least for my own edification, I'd like to understand a little bit more about the difference between soil and dirt. Is dirt what you find like in cities, at the edge of the sidewalk where you have just earth? That's not earth, that's dirt. Where does dirt emerge as contrast to soil?
Yeah. So
is that a man-made thing, dirt?
Dirt is the result of destroying soil, the life in soil. So if you were to go to a farm that has worked for years using composting, using introduction of microbiome and other forms of bacteria and fungi to build the structured soil that's a healthy, vibrant life form of soil, and you pick that soil up, it's oftentimes black in color. It has a lightness about it. It smells amazing. You can eat it. And you pick up a piece of dirt that you find, someplace it doesn't have to be in an urban setting. It could be at a construction site. It's pale in color. It's incredibly dense. It's very heavy. And there's no life in it. And you can almost feel, if you've got healthy soil, you can almost feel the life, the energy of the life force that's in that soil versus picking up a handful of dirt.
Amazing. Amazing. I mean, it's uh, what we're doing to ourselves is so all around us. But we know not what we do. It's like Jesus on the cross. Father, forgive them; they know not what we do, what they do. You know, we need to say that about ourselves over and over again. It's quite extraordinary.
Yeah, I love the emergence of the field of biomimicry over the last couple of decades,
Yeah.
where scientists, practitioners of various backgrounds are looking at Mother Nature for solutions and then mimicking it or replicating it for contemporary society and for application in our lives. It's
Mhm.
extraordinary work, and it's just a beautiful thing to watch.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
If
Well,
you
I know
walk
with
into a
water, you can deplete water. You can turn water lifeless as well.
yes,
And so it looks the same unlike Earth, but it is possible for us to completely ruin our environment, and we're doing it on a regular basis.
yes,
So
yes.
let's talk about some of the solutions that are out there and what people are doing to really both understand and restore the health of the microbiome. So just tell us a little bit more about, I know you're involved in a company and you've been tracking Zach Bush and others. Tell us more about some of the positive things that are happening.
Yeah, happy to, and thanks for the opportunity to talk about that. So if we look, there are a number of nonprofits in the reforestation arena, doing work in the global south to restore landscapes. And one of the models that was created in the last 20 years or so is a model called agroforestry. And that model uses an integration of trees, because of the leaf litter that can help create compost, because of the ability to block wind, to keep the soil from moving away. It's a very elegant model of integrating agricultural practices into a forestry setting. And so from a natural systems point of view, it's a beautiful model for ensuring that there's healthy soil and that there's an economic opportunity, as well as a food security opportunity for the local people. And so that would be a natural solution for restoring soil health and human health. We have seen a big movement in the organic farming movement here in the US and around the world over the last several decades that are using composting practices and other activities to restore the soil health. And then we're starting to see, because of the scale of the destruction of the soil, we're seeing industry that's starting to move into this space of restoring soil health. And there are a variety of reasons for it. Partly it's the carbon sequestration opportunity and the growing carbon market for creating revenue for the farmers, for companies to make money. There's a realization that all of the inputs that are required, whether it's genetically modified seeds, fertilizers, pesticides, et cetera, it's gotten too expensive. And so for particularly industrial agriculture, they're looking for alternatives. And so ironically, some of the companies that have created the problem, genetically modified seeds, chemicals, et cetera, are now looking for ways to create and patent soil microbiome. And they're now selling soil microbiome amendments in response to the destruction of the soil that they've done for several decades now. And it's a new business opportunity for them. And then there are organizations that,
So
for all of the
they
right,
destroy the soil, make money on that, and then they restore the soil and make money on that.
yeah, Yep.
It's unbelievable. But keep going.
Yeah, and then there are other organizations that, you know, have looked at what's available in nature and learned from nature to take you know, the complexity of what healthy soil looks like and reintroduce a complex set of microbiome back into the soil to restore the soil health. And it's, you know, it's an ongoing science. It's going to take years to fully understand it. But at least some of the organization I'm aware of and the work that they're doing, they're having extraordinary impact on whether it's in the agricultural space in terms of reducing the inputs, including the amount of water that's needed for crops, because you're changing the soil structure. So there's an increased water holding capacity of the soil. And then the output, both the yield is significantly higher and the nutrient density is higher. In the you know, certainly in the tree space, seeing enhanced radial growth of the trunk of the tree, and increased size of the tree canopy, and fruit and nut production goes up significantly.
Remarkable. Remarkable. Now, what do you make of, you know, Rudolf Steiner had a whole notion of what he called biodynamic agriculture.
Mhm.
And there's other kinds of naturalistic agricultural models. What do you know about that in relationship to microbiome?
Yeah, I mean it's no different than what we see as, you know, as human beings. If you get a, you know, a group of people together who have, you know, the same social background, same educational background, same way of seeing the world, and they're, you know, attempting to solve a problem or attempting to do something, they're going to quickly get to consensus, and they're going to quickly agree on the same thing and move forward. And, you know, much of industry around the world, much of government around the world has been a result of that kind of thinking. And it's only in the last few decades that, you know, we have in the business world, we've inherently realized the value of diversity and the outcomes that are possible when you've got people from different backgrounds, different perspectives, different life experiences. The quality of the thinking goes up extraordinarily. Getting to consensus, it can take longer, but their end result is an extraordinary outcome. And, you know, that's another example of biomimicry. We see that in nature, and certainly Steiner's work. If you grow a monocrop in a field, within a couple of years, the soil is completely depleted, and you've got to introduce nitrogen, you've got to introduce fertilizer, you've got to introduce any number of things. And what Steiner saw in his work and what he put forward with biodynamic farming is you need a diversity of crops. They work together, they work collaboratively, they restore the soil, they don't deplete the soil. And he was, you know, his work was so far ahead of its time. And, you know,
It's
thank
interesting.
goodness
And
that it wasn't forgotten.
yeah. And de Lovenfoss is saying that Steiner even collected the dew and made contact with the etheric field in order to make bread.
Yeah.
So, you know, we think of microbiome, just the earth, but a guy like Steiner could see that the dew and the etherics around the ecosystem played a role in the nutritiousness of the bread that he was making from the wheat that he was harvesting.
Yeah.
You know, so that this living soil is connected with the living ecosystem. It's all one thing.
Yeah. Yep.
It's really, really remarkable. I've been just fascinated by Janine Binion's work on sort of biodiversity and biomimicry.
Hmm.
That the relationship, just reading an article the other day on the relationship between biodiversity and biomimicry.
Yep.
That the life, our capacity to mimic the biodiversity is really dependent on our capacity to allow biodiversity, because the biomimicry is a web. It's not one thing in nature.
Right.
And but say more about that, because that's so fascinating. I'm thinking of like Ed Muller, who's been on many times, who says that the key to solving climate change is just unleashing biodiversity across the world. And then, of course, humans then mimicking what it is that they're creating in terms of the biofield.
Yeah. Well,
So speak to us about that.
yeah, I mean, he's absolutely right. So, if we just focus on soil for a moment, if we can restore soil health, and the only way you can do that is through biodiversity, by having a very complex infrastructure of different microbiome that is incredibly diverse, then the soil has the ability to sequester and hold the CO2 that it sequesters from the from the atmosphere. With trees, it's the same thing. With trees and forests, if we can restore the soil health, then trees have the ability to sequester at least a couple hundred gigatons of the 300 gigatons of excess CO2 in the atmosphere. So if we've got healthy trees and healthy forests, because we've got healthy soil, then there's an opportunity for it to support the sequestration. With grasslands, we don't even know what the potential is of sequestering excess CO2 from the atmosphere. If we can restore grasslands, because if you look at in the Midwest, for example, of the US, the grasslands that existed at that time before we introduced deep plowing, where we were destroying the root systems of the grasslands in the Midwest, the roots would go down as much as 8 or 10 or 12 feet. And when you think about the amount of carbon that can be sequestered and held by that complex root system in the soil going down 8, 10, 12 feet, it's extraordinary. And I've seen studies that suggest that if we were to restore all of the grasslands on the planet, it could sequester like 230 gigatons of CO2 from the atmosphere.
And we've only put up 300 gigatons. Right. So that would take, just grasslands would take care of most of it.
Yeah, yeah. And we haven't even talked about the ocean. And there's so much research that has been done that's focused just on the land and the plants on the land. And in the oceans, there's an extraordinary amount of body of research that needs to be done to understand the complexity of the microbiome in the oceans.
Well, and our knowledge of the oceans is only a fraction of our knowledge of the Earth.
Yeah, and the oceans are 75% of the land mass on.
Yeah,
of the
we
mass
know very, very little actually about what it is and really what's happening down there.
Yeah.
So as you look forward, Tom, how do you see the governments and the major corporations? Do you see the beginnings of a mega trend? Because I think what we see with the Monsantos, trying to descend upon India and chemicalize and pesticide, agriculture, this great San Joaquin Valley in California. I don't think there's much microbiome left. I think it's dirt that's
Right.
just chemically fertilized in increasing concentrations year after year to extract less and less product.
Right.
And so there's a huge amount of destruction going on. Are there glimmers of hope out there? Are there any countries or any corporations that are doing something in a substantial way?
Yeah, I do see positive signs, and for me, it's just a question of what's going to win out. Is it Mother Nature, or can human activity actually repair the damage that's been done? And in human relations, there's a therapist named Terrence Real who has done a lot of work on relational therapy. And he talks about in relationship, we can go from a place of harmony. And oftentimes when a couple first come together, there's a lot of harmony. And then we move into periods of disharmony and then a period of repair. And through that repair holds the promise of harmony again. And I would say that's where we are as a species on this planet. We existed at a time in relation with nature. We lived in harmony with nature. The last several of centuries in particular, we've moved into this place of disharmony.
Mm.
And there's an opportunity for us to now do repair. And so I'll start here in the US. The Biden administration recently has put forward an initiative thinking about, the US government owns, I don't know, something like or controls 230 million acres of land in the US. And a lot of it's through the Bureau of Land Management, US Forest Service, US Department of Agriculture, et cetera, Department of Defense. And the Biden administration has put forward that instead of focusing that government-owned land and making it available, which has been part of the U.S. Policy for the last 100 years, making it available for extraction, making it available for cattle grazing. The Deb Haaland, the Secretary of the Department of Interior, recently announced an initiative to shift the focus of the use of that land to restoring the land and using it as a carbon sink, and the ability to have it from a national defense perspective, from a strategic defense perspective. If we can use that land to draw down carbon, that has more value to the US politically, strategically, et cetera, in combating climate change. And that's huge. We have not seen any administration in 100 years change the way we think about government-owned land. And even though the US isn't a signatory to the Paris Climate Accords, the Biden administration has been working hard to try and honor what we can do. And so there's a fundamental shift in the government and government policies and government actions to be thinking about how can we use the US national forest and national land as a carbon sink, as opposed to one other place where industry can do extraction. And so that's, for me, that's a hopeful sign.
Brilliant.
Other governments around the world are doing the same thing. They are signatories to the Paris Accord, and they are looking at their forests. They're looking at their lands as an opportunity to meet their agreements around the Paris Climate Accords. And so that's a hopeful sign. And then within industry, we are seeing businesses who are focused on getting to net zero, so stopping the emissions. But as they're looking at, they can't fully stop emitting, and so they're looking for ways to offset their carbon footprint. And so they're engaging with NGOs around reforestation activities. They're engaging and looking for opportunities to be able to offset their carbon footprint while they try and get to net zero. And where there's economic opportunities, business will move quickly, and we're seeing that, whether it's in the venture capital world or
Fantastic.
in the creation. So it's a race against time from my perspective.
Yeah,
We've created over the last 140 years a huge problem, and the question is, can we get to the solutions fast enough? And I don't know. We had reached out to David Suzuki last year to bring him on to Humanity Rising during a week of endangered programming to talk about climate change. And this is a man who had spent his whole life trying to wake people up to say, we've got a crisis. And he declined to join us on the show and just said, I've given up. I'm in my 80s, and the precious time I have left, I'm going to spend it with my children, my grandchildren, my great
Mhm.
grandchildren, and enjoy what little time I have left on this planet. And so there's lots of reason to give up. Um, and if we look at where we are, all of the data suggests it's too late. We're consuming a couple of planet Earths, and the world population is currently at 8 billion. We're going to top out at about 11.5 billion people. So adding another 3.5 billion people to planet Earth um, would, if things don't change, we're already beyond the tipping point. I think most people acknowledge that. And the question is, can we take the dramatic steps necessary and get it done in time? I don't know. I truly don't know. But from my perspective, we got to try.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And the fact that a government like the United States would, even contemplate what you're saying with, hundreds of millions of acres of land is it a positive signal? And so thank you for bringing that to our attention. It's the things are getting better and better, worse and worse, faster and faster. And we're a race against time. We're in a race against ourselves. We're in a race at all kinds of levels to stop the madness and create a better world. So thank you, Tom, for your thoughts on the microbiome today. It's been very, very illuminating and inspiring.
Yeah, I think you started the program just talking about what's happening in the Middle East, and it's so easy to condemn the military industrial complex for all of the right reasons. And yet, if you talk to, and I've had an opportunity, if you talk to leaders in the Department of Defense here in the US, if you talk to leaders of the military in other industrialized nations around the world,
Mm,
one of their biggest concerns is climate change.
absolutely.
And they're looking for opportunities to address climate change. We haven't talked about it today, but there are 80 million climate refugees on the planet right now. That's going to be 200 million by the end of this decade. So in the next 6 or 7 years, that's going to be 200 million climate refugees. By 2050, it's estimated to be 1 billion people on planet Earth will not be able to live where they wanted to live, where they grew up. And they've got to go someplace where they're not welcome. And that will create conflict. We saw it in Syria.
Totally.
Where it was a climate-driven disaster that resulted in a very intense war that could have resulted in World War III. And so the leaders in the Defense Department get that. They understand this is a strategic issue. And it all goes back to restoring soil health.
Yeah. Yeah. If humanity would concentrate on just rebuilding the foundation out of which we came, that would lead to all the solutions we seek. There's no doubt about it. From dust we came, and to dust we return. We are earth. We're water, but we're also earth. We're earth and water.
Yep.
Basically, conscious earth and water.
Yeah.
And we've forgotten that very simple fundamental fact about ourselves.
Yeah. I mean,
Well,
this program is Humanity Rising. And how do we get humanity
yeah.
to rise? How do we not just the vast majority of the people on planet Earth who are living in peace already, but how do we get more peace on planet Earth? It fundamentally comes down to restoring the soil health, because
Mhm.
with that, people have food security, they're healthier, and so many of the other problems and issues we're dealing with as a species could be solved by restoring soil health. It's that simple
Yeah.
and that hard.
Yeah. And it's all the stuff we walk on every day. Well, Tom, thank you so much. I've really appreciated this. Can you stay for a few minutes in the after chat?
Yeah, happy to.
Good, good. Well, that'll do it for us for today, everyone. Tomorrow, I'll be talking for Humanity Rising on the mystery and extraordinary grandeur of the pyramids of Mesoamerica, of the Maya. As you know, we're preparing for our journey to Teotihuacan for the solstice with the Kogi elders in light of the Kogi prophecy, which, as Tom has just been indicating, it's Mother Earth that's rising up and telling us we're now in a time of reckoning. So I've been really delving into studying about the Maya and their civilization and what gave rise to something as extraordinary as Teotihuacan. So I'm going to share a few of my learnings tomorrow about Mesoamerica, the Maya, the pyramids, and our upcoming pilgrimage. So that'll be tomorrow on Humanity Rising. So that'll do it for us for today. You can see the link to the after chat in the chat box. You received the link in your Zoom invites for today. Tom, thank you very much. You made me feel warm and cuddly about my microbiome again.
Well, thank you, Jim. It's always a pleasure.
Always a pleasure. Thank you, brother.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, everyone. See you tomorrow. Bye for now.